Hello and welcome to Toby Jones Talks Music. Now, for anyone who may well be new to this channel, I am a child of the 21st century. I was born in 2001. So for somebody my age, I think it's fairly reasonable to have influences of artists from the 90s, the 80s, the 70s, from parents, peers, brothers and sisters, people who are slightly older than you. But I think for somebody of my age, it is possibly surprising to have any influences kind of that go further back than the 1970s. I think that the 70s, the 80s are quite a nostalgic time for people at the moment, and then later on from that, the 90s, with groups like Oasis being massive with their reunion tour. So this really asks the question, the burning question, of how I became influenced to get into the Seekers. And I thought that was a great question. I was listening to some of the Seekers music last night on my iPod, and I thought, this is as good a time as any to do a video about my discovery of the Seekers, and it's actually been a really good exercise because I've researched a little bit more about the group. I've got some of their albums on vinyl, which I'll show you along the course of this video, and I've learnt a bit more about the Seekers, so it's been a really good exercise, and I'm going to talk all about how I got into the Seekers, how I was influenced. But I think firstly, to understand everything, I think for you watching and for me as well, we have to understand who the Seekers are. So the Seekers were a 60s kind of folk pop group that consisted of 4 members. So there was a lead vocalist, a brilliant lead vocalist. So I'm going to use the picture from this album, Roving with the Seekers, which you can see if you're watching on YouTube. So the lead vocalist in this group was Judith Durham, who's in the middle here, who sadly we lost in 2022. And Judith Durham had a brilliant, brilliant voice. Just to the side of Judith Durham on this side with the Buddy Holly kind of glasses is Athel Guy, who played double bass and provided backing vocals. We've got Keith Podger, sorry if I'm mispronouncing some of these names at the bottom here, who played lead guitar, banjo, backing and lead vocals, and I've always thought this guy was a Engelbert Humperdinck lookalike. You'll be able to see him more possibly on some of the other covers. I think this, the For and Only Seekers, is possibly a little bit of a better display, so it's that guy just there. I always think he's looked a little bit like Engelbert Humperdinck, but possibly other people don't. That might just be me. And then the last chap left is Bruce Woodley, who played rhythm guitar, banjo, backing and lead vocals, and co-wrote a couple of songs for the group as well. Had a bit of a relationship with Paul Simon, a working relationship that is. There were a group called the New Seekers in the late 60s and early 70s, and you might well know them. They had hits like You Won't Find Another Fool Like Me, or I'd Like to Teach the World to Sing. And Keith Podger, or Engelbert Humperdinck lookalike as we're going to call him, he was the founder of that group, and he actually featured on their second album, Keith, is it Potger? I'm going to go for Potger. Keith Potger and the New Seekers, and again, for the second time, apologies if I'm getting the pronunciation of that wrong. So yeah, these guys were a 60s folk and pop group that recorded mostly covers and traditional songs. So some traditional songs like Come By R and Whiskey in the Jar and those sort of songs. But they did have a couple of self-penned songs, or at least some co-writes. So looking at their big singles, their best-selling singles that went to the top of the charts, there's one name that does stand out on a lot of that, and that is Tom Springfield, who was related to Dusty Springfield, who some of you will, I think a lot of you will have heard of Dusty Springfield. So Tom Springfield wrote I'll Never Find Another You, The Carnival Is Over. He wrote the music to Georgy Girl, with Jim Dale supplying the lyrics, Island of Dreams and A World of Our Own. They were some of the Seekers' biggest songs, and Tom Springfield wrote those. Paul Simon, who I've mentioned earlier, wrote Someday, One Day. As I was going through the Wikipedia actually to learn about some of this, I found a cracking advertisement which I'll put up here for I'll Never Find Another You, which says something like number one in the UK and the US? And that, I thought that was a brilliant advert, so I've saved that and I might print it at some point. I think that's a really good advert. Slightly off topic. But then there were a couple of co-writes for the guys in the band. So Keith Potger, he co-wrote the beautiful song Emerald City, and Bruce Woodley co-wrote Red Rubber Ball with Paul Simon. So they had quite a number of hits. They had 2 number 1 hits in this country. The first one, which I have got on single, is I'll Never Find Another You, with Open Up Them Pearly Gates on the B-side. And the other number 1 was The Carnival Is Over. That's a beautiful song. They had 6 number 10 singles, so A World of Our Own went to number 3, Walk With Me went to number 10, another single which I've got the physical copy of, Morningtown Ride, that went to number, looks more like Morningtown Rice in the light. Isn't that strange? I think there's probably a bit of, might be the camera, because it looks like Ride to me, it is definitely Morningtown Ride, I'll assure you, not Morningtown Rice. That also went to number 2, and Georgy Girl went to number 3. They had one UK number 1 album, which was the Best of the Seekers, and I don't actually have that one. I did, but I swapped that for the very best of, which I'll show a little bit later on. And in hindsight, looking at that now, the prior one was actually a bit of a tighter set of songs. I think there was 12 songs on there, and that's a really good tight set of songs. So maybe I should have kept that. The one that I've got, the later release, is 20 songs, and there aren't as many on that I like. So in hindsight, I maybe should have kept that other one, but oh well. They had 5 UK number 10 albums as well. A World of Our Own went to number 5, Come the Day went to number 3, Live at the Talk of the Town went to number 2, and then a later compilation, 1994's A Carnival of Hits, went to number 7. Now, I haven't researched their chart success in other countries, but certainly in this country, they were a fairly big deal. They were fairly popular in the 60s, and if you look at 60s compilations with songs, you'll find pockets of their music, whether it's I'll Never Find Another You or A World of Our Own or Georgy Girl. You'll find a couple of these songs pocketed on those compilations. So they were certainly a thing over in this country. So that leads to the question of how I got into this group, and that is an easy one to an extent. It was my grandparents' influence. I've talked about my grandparents' influence on this channel a little bit in the past on various videos, but my grandparents, so they were born in the late 30s, 37 and 39, so they were into late 50s stuff, so the likes of Lonnie Donegan I got from them, Frankie Lane I got from them, but then they also really liked country and western singers, so I think I've mentioned Frankie Lane, haven't I? So Johnny Cash and Marty Robbins and Charlie Pride. And then they were into folk music. They had some Irish music CDs with the likes of Foster and Allen on, and Brendan Shine, and is it Hugo Duncan, I think it is. And I have to say, I like some of that stuff. Even some of the Daniel O'Donnell stuff I like. But they also liked folk kind of things, so the likes of Cosma Fika and Gary and Fia Aspie and Jake Thackeray and Roger Whittaker, and that also extended to the Seekers. So the Seekers was very much from my grandparents' influence. And there'll be a photo up here of a little me, and this, you can kind of say things on YouTube, can't you? You can say things and bluff and say, well, I did this, I did that, none of it's really true. Well, unless I've been that sad to Photoshop this is true. This is a photo of me from when we went abroad in 2009. So I was only 8 at this point. And regular look for me with my headphones on, my Skull Candy, I think they were white headphones at this point, with my most prized possession at 8 years old, and still is at the age of 25 today, my iPod Classic. And you can just see, I've done a zoom in on that picture. And I can kind of see it. You might go, no, I can't see it. But I'm 95% sure that is the Seekers' greatest hits album. Now, obviously, I can't see what individual song was playing in that picture, but you get the kind of gist. So, I was, very much early on, when I was 7, 8, 9, 10, that iPod Classic was a big way for me to discover music, and that greatest hits album, which unfortunately I haven't got to hand. I haven't got a CD of it. I just had that on my iPod Classic. I like every single track on that album. There's a good 20-odd tracks on that. I think there's 27 or 28 tracks on that. It's a really strong compilation set. And I also remember on that holiday, I also had a Slade compilation on the iPod Classic, which I'll show the cover of up there. Again, it was one that was only on the iPod, but that was my uncle's influence, so my uncle being my grandparents' son, if you like. So I've had the privilege, if you like, to have a very mixed influence base. I've got the mainly rock music from my dad. I've got more pop and soulful and dancier kind of music from my mum. Then we've got that with my grandparents and maybe some stuff from my sisters as well. And I've been influenced by friends. So I feel like I have quite a eclectic music taste, which is why it might come as a bit of a surprise to those of you on this channel that I am covering the Seekers. But I do like 70s and 60s music. And as a matter of fact, I did an exercise quite a while ago. On my iPod Classic, I have playlists of 70s tracks and 80s tracks, kind of singles and tracks by artists that I like, because I find that especially those that I only like 1 or 2 of their songs, I don't tend to play very much. So if I'm calling for something from an era, I'll just put 70s on and you'll get your Sweet and your Slade, and you're in that kind of mood, aren't you? So I made one for the 60s, and I kind of thought there isn't really much I like in the 60s, and I was just quite surprised by how much of the 60s music that I like, the likes of Roy Orbison and Gene Pitney and Tom Jones, Engelbert Humperdinck I mentioned earlier, Roger Whittaker, the Seekers, Dusty Springfield, some of the girl groups, the Motown and soul stuff that was going on at this point. I don't mind some of the Beatles stuff, the Beach Boys stuff, but the 60s was a really, really strong decade for music. I have got one of their CD compilations, and this is one I bought not too long ago. It was a couple of years ago now, because I hadn't got any Seekers CDs in my collection, and the thing I really wanted to find was that greatest hit set that was released. It was a Parlophone release from 2009. But unfortunately, I haven't been able to find that. But this is a very good substitute. So this is a free CD compilation from the Reader's Digest. I got this from a charity shop quite cheap. And I've had a look through this morning. Everything on that 2009 compilation is on here, with the exception of Myra, which I'm okay because I'm not that bothered about that song, and Esquire Love Lilt, which I think is a traditional song. That is a beautiful song with a great orchestral arrangement and another great Judith Durham vocal. But this is almost, so it's 3 discs, so you've got 21, 42, you've got 63 songs on that. So it's almost the compilation I had before plus bonus tracks. So this is a nice thing to have. But I have to say, actually, and this is a nice thing we get in the albums out as well, I haven't listened to all that much outside of what I already know. So this might be a good opportunity to do just that, actually. I also started a Facebook group for this group back in 2009, and I can't remember what the motivation was for that. And it's funny, isn't it? I was 8 at the time, and I don't have that much recollection of doing it. But it wasn't until I went back years later and had a look at it, and I'd got posts in there from 2009, and I'd created this group. And I went back into it, I guess, a couple of years ago, and it's now got 9,000 members, so that's unbelievable. I haven't got anything to do with the group anymore. But yeah, that's just fantastic. That's another name drop of something I did that I'd almost completely forgotten about. But for other people to enjoy this group, that's really amazing. So chuffed about that group has got over 9,000 members. That's crazy, really, isn't it? But I'm going to show now the albums that I've got of the Seekers. As I said earlier in the video, this has been a really interesting exercise because there are a few reissues of here, and the history is a little bit complex. So let me take you through this. So I have overall, I think there's 7 or 8 of the Seekers albums on vinyl. So first off is the one I had shown earlier. So this is Roving with the Seekers. This is a Music for Pleasure reissue though. So this one, Roving with the Seekers, was released in 1971. But it's actually a Music for Pleasure reissue of their second album, a self-titled album called The Seekers. And this is mostly, I guess there's a couple of traditional things on here. So we've got The Wreck of the Old 97, we've got Whiskey in the Jar, they do a good version of that, and South Australia. I think my favourite on this one has to be 500 Miles. It's a nice slower arrangement, and Judith's vocals are beautiful, and the guys' backing vocals are really good as well. That's something I have to say, that although Judith's vocals are very good, the backing vocals really complement that as well in some of the harmonies that this group has. And the guys did sing as well. They had a couple of songs where they sang on their own. Red Rubber Ball was one of those, and I think there was a couple more, but I can't think of any off the top of my head, but there certainly were a few. So the second one we have here is the For and Only Seekers, which this was released in 1969, this reissue, but it's actually a reissue of their third album, Hide and Seekers. But I've got a funny story about this one before I talk about the album itself briefly. This was my first case when I was buying records a few years ago of a mismatched record. So again, I'll tell the story, and I'll keep telling the story because I appreciate that not everybody watches everything round here. That when I first had a record player about 6-7 years ago now, I decided to buy everything under the sun. And I don't know why. I said I want one album, and that was Neil Diamond's Hot August Night. And then that turned into more albums and more albums and more albums. So some of these I got from an eBay job lot. I think it was 6 or 7 Seekers albums for about £6 or £7. So that was pretty decent, wasn't it? Nearly £1 each. But a funny story about this. This was my first case of a mismatched record. So got it out, and I thought, that's not right. Inside, which I think will be up here, inside this was actually Strings for Pleasure, play Simon and Garfunkel, another Music for Pleasure release, but going in a lot of charity shops. There are a lot of these sort of things, aren't there, where you've got different orchestras play the music of Simon and Garfunkel or Neil Diamond or something like that. And somebody deviously commented on the post that I put on Facebook at that time that I'd got a better record. I mean, how rude. Morningtown Ride, which I've shown earlier, the single is on this album. The B-side of that I've never actually heard is When the Stars Begin to Fall, which is another traditional song. Tom Springfield getting in again here as producer, but I've never heard that one, so that's not on this album though. So there's This Little Light of Mine, which is a Seekers arrangement, I think, of a traditional song. That's a good one, I enjoy that. Morningtown Ride again, really like Well, 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 that's a classic. What else we got here? Kumbaya is a original arrangement, that's fine. Blowing in the Wind, that's a good version of the Bob Dylan track. And then probably the highlight of this album has to be Escarade Love Lilt, which I mentioned briefly earlier, which is a really beautiful, beautiful song. So that's that one. The first one which I've actually got, which is the proper album, not a reissue, is 1965's A World of Our Own, with the four guys, the three gents and Judith on the front there. That's a cracking picture, isn't it? I really like that picture on the front of that cover. But this is a mono record, so it's got A World of Our Own on it, the title track. Apart from that, I'm not familiar with a lot of this stuff. Again, it's quite folky, so you've got another Bob Dylan cover, Don't Think Twice, It's Alright. This was sort of, not conventional, what's the word? Contemporary stuff at that time, not conventional. You've got This Land Is Your Land, which is a Roddy Guthrie cover, another Dylan cover with The Times They Are A-Changin'. Don't Tell Me My Mind, which was written by Bruce Woodley, I would guess. It is Woodley, so I can only think it is Bruce Woodley. It says on here, this is the second of Bruce's songs. It's a lively travelling type number with a strong Nashville atmosphere about it. But apart from A World of Our Own and a couple of the traditional songs, I'm not all that au fait with this record. Their fourth one from 1965. This, another good cover with the guys on the front, is Come the Day from 1966. So we have the song Come the Day, which again is a Bruce Woodley written track. Island of Dreams, which I mentioned earlier. Their version of The Last Thing on My Mind is a great version. Red Rubber Balls on here, Well, Well, Well. It's Well, Well, Well on an earlier one. I feel like that was on the second album, actually, which is interesting. So that features, maybe on, unless it's a different version, but I'm sure that features on here. Yeah, it does. So that features on Hide and Seekers, which actually, if you look here on the back cover, if you're watching on YouTube, says The Four and Only Seekers or Hide and Seekers. So I don't think it's on, no, it's not on the front or on the spine. So they only make reference to that on the back cover. And I'd imagine you'd be quite cheesed off, wouldn't you, if you'd bought the original album just to find out, oh, this is just a rehash of the earlier album with a different name. But interestingly, Well, Well, Well appears here as well. Georgy Girl, great song. Cover of Yesterday, the Beatles song, of course. Turn, 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 not Bob Seger. Is it Pete Seeger? I think. Fortunately, my only knowledge of this area is the Bob Dylan film that came out last year, A Complete Unknown. It's not Bob Seger. And California Dreaming, the Mamas and Papas tune. Again, good covers. Really good cover stuff on here. We've got a live album, which I haven't listened to this. I'd be interested to give it a listen at some point. This is Live at the Talk of the Town. And this is another case of a repress. This is a 1976 repress of a 1968 live album. What I'll try and do with some of these reissues, I'll put the original covers up in the corner. Looking here, though, there's a fair amount of songs that I know. This is a decent set. Hello, Mary Lou, they perform in this one, the Gene Pitney song. That would be an interesting one. Happy Birthday to You. Okay, that would be an interesting one. But I think one of the other inspirations for this video as well is from actually to go and listen to some of these records. I am and was guilty of buying a lot of these records and then not really listening to them. So now I've got them out of the wardrobe, out of hiding, because they're not in my regular rotation, so they're kind of in the vaults, if you like, the Toby Jones Talks Music vaults. So now I've got them out, they might as well stay out and I might give them a bit of a listen. This one, again, is another reissue. Amazing just how many reissues and represses there were of the Seeker stuff. Another good photo of these guys on the front. So this is a contour repress. Don't know when it's from. It doesn't say when this repress was, but the original album was 1969 Seeker's Golden Collection, which I think is a compilation of their earlier stuff. So Kumbaya's on here, Myra's on here, which I think was one of their first singles, South Australia, This Land Is Your Land. I'll have to give this a listen. I don't think I'm going to be all that fussed about this one, but it could be an interesting document to listen to. So that's what, is that 5 or 6 albums? I think that's, yeah, 6 studio albums I've got of theirs. And then, as I mentioned earlier on in the video, I did have The Best of the Seekers, which was their album that went to #1. But I've also got, well, I've now got this one, which is The Very Best of the Seekers. This is quite a well-known label EMI thing where they'd have the very best of a certain artist with this label design on the front. And as I talked about earlier, this is 20 tracks, so quite a lot of tracks on each side, interestingly. Fortunately, the Seekers tracks are all quite short. I'm looking at all these on side 1. They're all below 3 minutes. But it's not quite as tight as the other album, I feel, especially side 2. We've got Love Is Kind, Love Is Wine, which is another Bruce Woodley song. Just a Closer Walk with Thee, Cotton Fields, We're Moving On, The Leaving of Liverpool, which none of those I'm particularly bothered about at the moment. Again, more listening, I might be more bothered about them. But this isn't quite as tight for me as the previous ones, or the previous one would be. I've got several of those, though, the Very Best series. Jake Thackeray's, I've got his, I've got Roger Whittaker's, they spring to mind, but there's several as well. And then that one was so good and sold so well, they did a second one. And I picked this up in a charity shop, I'll say not long ago, probably about 5 years ago now. The time goes that quickly. And I'd never seen one of these before, actually. The second album of The Very Best of the Seekers. So another 20 tracks here. Let's have a look what's on here. So this is an interesting one. It's definitely not as strong as the previous one, I feel. I don't think there's any of the... There's certainly none of the big selling singles on here. So on here you've got the likes of Well, 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 which I talked about earlier. More of the self-written songs, which is interesting. More of Bruce Woodley's songs. And that's what's coming across in this video, I think, that I'm finding. That there are quite a few Bruce Woodley written tracks. There was one, Emerald City, that was co-written with Keith Potka, wasn't it? So maybe there's more. I don't pretend to be a Seekers expert, just an interested person who's done a little bit of research on them. When the Stars Begin to Fall, that B-side of that single that's on here. If You Go Away, I might have a listen to that because I really like Neil Diamond's version of that. Nobody's Better, that for me. Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen, that's a great song. Walk With Me. Louisiana Man's okay, but I don't think I've heard all of this that's on here, so it could be an interesting exercise, and if you're watching the video, you should be able to see, hopefully, the back of that album now. Might be an interesting exercise for me to go and listen to. And as I said earlier in the video, it's been a really interesting exercise, this, to do for me, to kind of rediscover the Seekers, particularly the vinyl albums I've got, and maybe broaden my horizons outside of the greatest hits set. I did a video on Bread quite a long time ago now, the group Bread, not Warburtons or Kingsmill or Hovis. The sort of easy listening group, if you like, kind of, I guess, even rocky group at some point, Bread. And I talked about how I think a compilation album is probably enough for that group, and I think that's probably about the same for the Seekers, to be honest. I don't think I'm going to go and listen to everything they've done. I might listen to a few of their albums. I can't see this being the start of a Seekers renaissance for me where I go and listen to everything they've ever done, but this is a group I like, and I thought, well, this is a good opportunity to talk about them, get their records out, talk a little bit about the records, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. A couple of things to say, actually, which I've written in the notes. So that second album, I said I hadn't seen this before, which I hadn't, but since then, it's not that uncommon, because they did a second album before Roger Whittaker as well. If you'd like to see, I might do a video about Roger Whittaker's records in this style as well, because I've got quite a few of Roger Whittaker's albums in there, which might give me a kick up the backside. I don't know what I'm doing that for. Kick up the backside, bit of exercise in the video. Well, exercise and recording at the same time. Don't mind me while I just do this. Yeah, they did one for Roger Whittaker as well, the second album. So, I guess before I end, I'm just going to say quickly what my favourite Seekers songs are. I've had a quick thought about this. It could change because they've got so many good ones. I'm going to go Island of Dreams, Carnival's Over, Red Rubber Ball, Georgy Girl, When Will the Good Apples Fall? I really like that one. That's kind of a story-led song. And that's what I like about some of these earlier songs. I am a rock-centric person, and that is my main passion. As you'll probably see behind me, I've got AC/DC, Pink Floyd, and some Moody Blues cassettes. You know, that's great stuff, and I love that kind of music. But some of it isn't really all that story-based, and it's more music than lyrics. Some of this music, particularly the likes of When Will the Good Apples Fall, they're really good story songs, and that's the same for a lot of the country and western singers that my grandparents liked as well. The likes of Frankie Lane, great story songs, and Glenn Campbell and all those other artists as well. When Will the Good Apples Fall, I've said, 500 Miles, among others. So there could be several which I could mention in this video. But I've really enjoyed that, as I say. If you've enjoyed this little look at the Seekers as well, leave a like down below. If you're into this group, then leave some comments down below. I've done some stuff on the channel about stuff from this similar era as well. It is mainly rock-centric, but I'm a big Neil Diamond fan. I've done a video about Roy Orbison, I've done a video about Elvis. So what I'm trying to do, I think, is not necessarily intentionally go, right, I've got to do a Seekers video, I've got to do a Glenn Campbell video, I've got to do a Roger Whittaker video, and kind of tick them all off. But it would be nice to build up a bit of a library here of at least one video about all of the artists that I care about. So I thought today would be a good idea to do the Seekers, and I might not revisit them again, or I might well do. But to be notified when all that goes on, make sure to subscribe down below if you want to see future content and ramblings from me on this music channel. We are available on all of the different social networks, Facebook, Instagram and X. I put a post on all of those sites when a new video goes up, because YouTube's not quite what it used to be with the subscription feed. So a lot of people watch videos now, and that's clear through my analytics, through the recommended feed. So even if you're subscribed to somebody, if you don't watch every video, which is fair enough, particularly because my channel isn't one where everything's about the same topic, so I think people will probably dip in and out. You're not always going to be shown those videos. So what I'm trying to do is raise awareness of the videos on every platform possible, so that you have more chance of seeing it. And if it's something you want to go and watch, think, oh, I'll watch that, or I'll put it in my watch later list and I'll watch it later. Or like I do, put something in my watch later and never watch it. But if you've got to this point, you have hopefully put it in your watch later and watched it, so good. And we also have an account on TikTok as well, which I've done a few shorts of and experimented with that as well. As I say again, I've really enjoyed doing this, so thank you for your company today. There'll be a video up there of something similar on the channel that you can go and enjoy. But whether you watch that or whether you don't, I wish you a great rest of your day, and above all, go and listen to some Seekers.